There are certain dates that live in the collective conscience of those who were living when they were old enough to remember. December 7th, 1941 is one such day that will live in infamy. That's what President Roosevelt said, Franklin Roosevelt, in his radio address announcing to the nation that the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor and declared war. Another such date that will live in infamy is September 11th, 2001. I imagine you know what you were doing when you heard the news. I remember what I was doing when I heard the news. I was eating breakfast, getting ready for work, watching the Today Show, and suddenly they break live to the trade towers and began getting eyewitness accounts of what happened. Some said a commercial aircraft like a Cessna hit the Twin Tower. Others said it was large as 747. As they were debating what airplane could have hit and caused such damage, another commercial aircraft hit the other tower, and it was clear that this was no accident, that this was an act of war. This was an act of terror. We learned 15 minutes later that another commercial aircraft hit the Pentagon, and by this time the FAA is grounding all aircraft, but there's one other aircraft in the sky that's not responding to the FAA and not responding to anything, any radios that have been sent to them, and we wonder, where is this commercial craft going? Is it headed to Congress or the White House? And then we hear that the aircraft crashed in the field of Pennsylvania thanks to the heroism of those on board. They got word what was going on, and they took action. There was much fear after that day, whether there would be more attacks to come. The Sunday following 9/11, the churches were full. They weren't half full. They were full. Look around you. They were full. But as no act of terror followed, many of us went back to our normal routine, and by 6 months, church attendance was back to pre-9/11 levels. Half full. I guess it's true. There's no atheist in foxholes. When we feel that life and death is on the line, we have an urgent need to get right with God. But if we feel that life and death is not on the line and we got all our life to get right with God, many options are afforded to us on a Sunday morning, and church is just one of them. Much has happened since 9/11, 2001. Today is the 15th anniversary. We now live in a post-9/11 world. If you doubt what I say, just try going to the airport and see how many levels of security you have to go through to get on an airplane. It used to be you could catch an airplane 30 minutes before your flight. That's not the case anymore. So what are we to learn in this post-9/11 years, 15 years after? What are we to remember? What are we to learn? Let me suggest to you, first and foremost, I think what we are to learn is that pursuing a whack-a-mole strategy is no way to win the war and win the peace. You know what a whack-a-mole is, do you not? Have you ever been to a state fair? Have you ever been to the Midway? Have you ever played any of those games? Well, one of those games is a whack-a-mole, and basically you get a mallet, and anytime a mole comes up or a clown comes back, what are you supposed to do? Whack it. And do you know where the next one's coming? No. And that's the way it is with terror. We don't know where the next one's coming. But the problem with a whack-a-mole strategy, if that's the only strategy we pursue, is this: that for every terrorist we take off the battlefield, 10 more enter it, unless we win the peace, unless we win the hearts and mind of the 4 billion Muslims that habitate this earth. As long as the terrorists are able to cast this epic battle as between Islam and the West, between Islam and Christianity, between Islam and the Crusaders, their appeal goes out to the 4 billion Muslims, many young Muslims who are unemployed and feel like they have nothing to lose. It attracts them. But the truth of the matter is, this war is not between Islam and the West or Islam and Christianity. This war on terror is a war within the heart of Islam, a struggle between the nature of Islam itself. If we can reframe this war as not a war between Islam and the West, but a war between those who would defame the good name of Islam, because in the Quran it talks about how the killing of innocents, women, children, is a great evil. If we can reframe this war on terror as a war against those who would defame Islam, we have a chance to win the hearts and minds of those, and win the war and win the peace. Speaking of peace, Paul has something important to say to us about peace, how we are to live in peace when there are those who are hostile to our faith. The first thing Paul would tell us is that we are to let love be genuine in verse 9. Let love be genuine. And you can say, what does genuine love look like? Well, it looks like what comes after verse 9. What comes after verse 9 is hate what is evil. Hold on to what is good. Make no mistake, plowing a commercial aircraft, taking it over and using it as a guided missile to hit and destroy the Twin Towers, killing innocents, is evil. It's evil. And we need to be able to call it. But the response of what happened after that act of evil was very, very good. Do you remember the firefighters who, at the risk of their own lives, went up the Twin Towers and got many to safety, even though themselves were not safe? Do you remember how the world responded to the outpouring of love and our grief? I had a chance to visit Ground Zero a year after 9/11. I had a chance to go to the church that's directly across from 9/11, the Episcopal Church. I had a chance to go in and I saw prayer flags from all over the world. Hate what is evil. Hold on to what is good. We need to remember that on this day. Paul goes on to say, love one another with mutual affection. Outdo one another in honor. So often when it comes to married couples, one is pretty good at saying those 3 words, I love you. And the other one is not so good at saying those words. I won't tell you how that relates to Catherine and I's relationship, but I will tell you about the movie that is Emma's favorite movie. It's Fiddler on the Roof. Remember Tevier? Do you remember that wonderful song? Do you love me? I think William Powers could do that really well, don't you? You thought I was going to do it? No. And then she responds with all the things she does for Tevye. Of course, I love you. It's important not only to say the words, but also to follow it with actions. If you only do the actions and don't say the words the actions could be misconstrued. Are you doing it for love, or are you doing it out of sense of duty? If you only say the words and don't follow the actions, these words become empty and hollow. Jesus loved us in word and deed. The Gospel of John will say, no greater love than this, when a person lays down his life for his friend. And Jesus did lay down his life for us. Paul goes on to say, rejoice in hope, be patient in suffering, persevere in prayer, contribute to the needs of the saints, extend hospitality to strangers. When people come by the church Monday through Friday, most of the time they're wanting something, some form of assistance or another. And when they say that they want to speak to the pastor, most of the times, 9 out of the 10 times, what they really are saying is, I want to speak to the pastor because I know he's a soft touch. And I want money. And so Debbie will screen those calls and try to refer them to agencies that can help them. But sometimes they insist on speaking to the pastors. And 9 out of 10 times when they want to speak to the pastor, what do they want? Money. But Debbie says, but this one wants to pray with you. How can you turn down prayer? But 9 out of 10 times when someone tells me they want to speak to the pastor and want to pray with the pastor, what do they really want? Money. So I've kind of been hardened by that. And so Debbie calls me up and tells me this person really needs to speak to the pastor and really needs prayer. I said, all right, I'm coming down. And we'll call him Matt. And I talked with Matt in the reception room. And the first thing out of Matt's mouth was, I have the utility bill I need paid. So what did I tell you? I said to Matt, we really don't have money for that. Then I expected him to tell me why I needed to pay the utility bill. He says to me, no, but what I really need is prayer. And I said, tell me why. And then Matt started telling me his life story, and particularly the part that really drew my attention was the part where his sister was tragically murdered by a drive-by shooting. It was a gang shooting, and one of the stray bullets hit her in the neck. The same drive-by shooting among the gangs, one of the persons got hit several times and survived. And what really bothered this individual, Matt, is why would God let this gang person live and his sister die, leaving 3 young children? We had a long conversation about that, and even longer prayer. Extend hospitality to strangers. Contribute to the needs of the saints. In that conversation, I asked Matt, do you have a church? He said, I used to have a church, but I don't have a church anymore. I said, Matt, you need to get plugged into a church, because part of what it means for love to be genuine, according to Paul, is to contribute to the needs of the saints. We know how to take care of our own when we're in community with our members. It's hard to know what our true needs of strangers are. Get connected to a church. And if you can't find a church that practices what they preach, you're welcome to come to this church. And so I'm hoping that Matt will join us. Then the subject shifts from let love to be genuine to bless those who persecute you. Bless, do not curse, do not repay evil for evil. To the extent that it depends upon you, live in peace with all. But what if someone has done me wrong? What if someone has brought shame to me and to my culture? In the Middle East, it's an honor and shame culture. And many times when people have been wronged, they feel like they needed to do something to avenge that wrong, to get back the honor that they feel that they deserve, to be held in high esteem among the family and the community. And many times to avenge that wrong means to do an act of violence. Now, Laban is a character in Genesis chapter 3. And Laban says this in Genesis chapter 3. If anybody wrongs me and my family, I will avenge 7 times. Did you get that? 7 times. At the giving of the law on Sinai, the book of the covenant says, an eye for an eye and tooth for tooth. But Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount says, you have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for tooth. But if your enemy strikes you on the cheek, what are you to do? Turn the cheek. Do not return evil for evil. Return evil with good. So if you see your enemy hungry, what are you to do? Feed. If you see your enemy thirsty, what are you to do? Give that person a drink. And thereby you put coals upon their head, hot burning coals upon their head. Commentators really don't know what that means, to tell you the truth. But in the South, we don't have a problem with what that means. In the South, have you ever heard this phrase? Kill them with kindness. And what it really means is to care for them in such a way that they're brought up short and realize, why am I acting so mean towards this person when all they're doing is being very good to me? It's supposed to have them come to their senses as the prodigal came to the prodigal senses. I was listening to a radio show, and I can't remember whether it was the Radio Hour or This American Life. I get them confused. But anyway, I was listening to the Radio Hour or This American Life, and the subject was this. The theme of the show was those who follow one script, suddenly they're presented with a different script. And they've got a choice of whether they continue with the old script or follow the new script. Have you ever been dancing? Remember in dancing in high school, I had to take that wonderful teen cotillion when you had to learn to dance, remember? We had to learn how to do that box step, and we had to learn how to do the funky chicken. My mom paid good money for me to learn to do the funky chicken. Now, in high school, when you're dancing and you're doing the box step, and suddenly the music changes and it's the funky chicken, what do? What? I don't hear you. You have a chance to do the funky chicken, to change the script. Well, This American Life, the subject was an anniversary, a 10-year anniversary, and they had went to Paris, and they brought their friends with them to Paris, and they were at an outdoor cafe, and they had good bottles of wine and were eating a pleasant dinner, and suddenly a robber comes with a gun and demands their money. And the script is, he's the robber, they're the victims, and they're to hand over their money. The problem is, they don't have any cash. They only have plastic. And the robber doesn't believe them. And then he's very agitated. And one of them is afraid that out of anger he might start shooting. So she says to the robber, honestly, we don't have any cash. But what we do have is a nice meal and a good bottle of wine. We're here celebrating my 10th wedding anniversary. Why don't you join us? Suddenly, the script is changing. He's now not the robber, but the invited guest. Will he change that script? Do the funky chicken? He doesn't sit down, he takes her glass of wine and takes a sip and says, it is good wine. He's a Frenchman, he likes good wine. So he sits down and has a meal with them. The gun is on the table the whole time. They have a wonderful meal. When it's over, they wonder, will the script change back to robber and victim? But it doesn't. He says, thank you for allowing me to be a guest, an honored guest at your anniversary. And he gets up and leaves and whistles as he's leaving. The prodigal came to his senses and returned home. Dylan Roof almost came to his senses. And Dylan Roof was wanting to start a race riot. That's why he entered that African American church. That's why he began shooting. But when he entered the African American church, he was greeted with hospitality. So much so, he said he almost changed his mind. But that African American church didn't stop practicing genuine love after the horrific event, because they took Paul's words seriously. Do not repay evil for evil, repay evil for good. They prayed for Dylan Roof and offered forgiveness because they want Dylan Roof and people like Dylan Roof bent on death and destruction and terror to come to their senses. May this church, may the Church of Jesus Christ be always a place that practices genuine love, an opportunity for the prodigal to come home, to end this war and win the peace, because we follow the one who is the Prince of Peace, who says, peace I give to you, not as the world gives do I give. Peace be upon you. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.